Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, I am excited to be up here today. I'm excited to be up here today because that means my first icebreaker speech is done, and I'm a little bit more confident that I will not black out in my speech. So in my last speech, I posed the question, who am I? And while I'm still honestly seeking the answer to that on a deeper level, I can give you all a brief description of what I know to be true. I am a daughter and a sister. I was born on May 16, 1986, to a bright and bubbly young woman named Billy. 2 days later, my social worker placed me with my adopted family, John and Chris, and their 4-year-old son, Kyle. I spent most of my childhood daydreaming about the day that I would get to meet my biological mom, and when that day finally came, I was more nervous than I had ever been in my life to that point. I met her about a month after I turned 18. We drove to Kansas City, where we planned to meet in the hotel lobby where we were staying. While we were waiting for her to arrive, late, of course, it runs in the family, I wondered if I would know her when she walked in. My adoptive mom and my brother were pacing, and I was an anxious chatterbox. When the doors opened and she walked through, however, I knew it was her. I had barely seen any photos of her, but I just knew her presence. This was the woman that gave me life, that put me up for adoption, but I still spent 9 months inside of her. I still knew who she was. That same day, I met her kind and loving husband, Troy, and my half-brothers, who were then 12, 5, and 3 years old. I stayed the night with them at their house that night, and we spent the whole night talking, getting to know them, and I guess we'd say we were getting to know each other, catching up on all the years that we had missed. Meeting Everett, my biological dad, and his 2 boys was much the same, though possibly even more nerve-wracking. This time we were in Indianapolis. It was my husband and I instead of my adoptive mother and brother. And we met in the hotel lobby where they were staying. So walking up to the doors to walk through them and meet them was probably the most nervous I'd actually ever been. Once we walked through and saw them, however, I could tell immediately that I had inherited just as much of my personality from them as I did from my mom. We were all 3 the definition of awkward in human form. It didn't take us long for us to connect, however, and I can say that the relationship that I have with them is closer than I could have ever imagined. I'm so lucky that I have these really loving and accepting people in my life. I sometimes do grieve the time that I didn't get to spend with them, but then I remember that the path is a part of the journey and that I wouldn't be where I am today had I grown up in Kansas with them. For example, I might not have met my amazing husband, Jimmy, if that was the case. So that brings me to my next point, that I am also a wife. I met my husband officially at a Christmas party in 2009. I will say that that's not the first time that we met. We'd actually met a few times before that. My best friend and her boyfriend were also close friends of Jimmy's. So the first time that we met was actually at a dinner party that they had planned. Hannah and Joe, my best friend, had planned, but Jimmy and I were the only 2 people to show up. We didn't talk at all, but he did give me money to buy brownie mix. The second time we met was because I was walking my small barkless dog, and his friend was barking at my barkless dog, which I thought was funny. And Jimmy stooped to say hello to her, and I remember looking at his face and thinking he looks so familiar and he's so handsome, but I couldn't quite figure out where I'd met him before. He doesn't remember any of these instances, by the way, which I think is really hilarious. So when the Christmas party rolled around, he introduced himself like we had met before, even though I knew who he was. So we hit it off immediately after that, and we went on a handful of dates before he found out that he got his dream job in Indianapolis. So I moved out to Indy 4 months after he did, and we lived there for 2.5 years before moving back to Colorado in 2012. We've lived in Colorado Springs ever since, adventuring around the state with our 2 small African barkless dogs named Lucy and Apollo. And one of the things I think I've learned the most about being married to Jimmy is that for our relationship to work the best, we each have to bring our individual personalities to the marriage. Which brings me to my last point, which is that I am me. Though I don't always know what that looks like, I'm getting better at understanding who I am. I've been wondering if we're meant to see ourselves like other people see us. It's so much easier for me to look at somebody else and see who they are and what makes them them, but it's difficult for me to turn and look at myself and what makes me, me. I I think we're meant to see ourselves as we are, flawed and beautiful. Not from an external view, but from our own internal perspectives. This has been so hard for me to learn because I'm very driven by human connection, and I've spent so much time being what I perceived other people wanted me to be. However, learning to exist in my skin and still be present with people is getting easier. I think Toastmasters is really helping me with that. It's teaching me to stand up here and be present with you all while sharing a little bit about myself and what I know to be true. Thank you guys.